Kia ora and welcome to another Physiotherapy Board Te Poari Tiaki Tinana podcast. This episode is on the subject of cultural safety and cultural competence and how they relate to Pacific peoples, either as kiritaki patients or as practitioners. This conversation was recorded on 26th of May 2026 and features board professional advisor Maarama Davis and two special guests from the School of Physiotherapy at Ōtākou Whakaihu, Waka, University of Otago. Elijah Areli is the first Pacific physiotherapist to lecture at Otago University, and Charleen Silcock is the Associate Dean Pacific at the School of Physiotherapy.
Ngā mihi mahana, talofa. Before I introduce my guests that are with me here today, a brief about our session. And we're going to be covering three areas, and these areas are interconnecting. We talk about them separately, but they do interweave and they are interconnected. We're looking at today, or listening to today, is from the perspective of really focusing in on Pacific peoples and what does cultural safety, cultural competence and cultural responsiveness, what does that look like for Pacific people in Aotearoa that are receiving and also delivering physiotherapy? So today I'd like to introduce our guest, Elijah Areli, who is a humble and respected Samoan physiotherapist within Physiotherapy Aotearoa, New Zealand. He has worked in various clinical spaces that have prioritised collaborative approaches to healthcare, multi and interdisciplinary teams alongside whānau engagement and involvement. In these spaces, he has worked with a diverse range of individuals with diverse stories. They're stories of persistent pain, of hope, of triumph, and of family. Elijah is the first Pacific physiotherapist lecturer at the University of Otago. He is a researcher with an interest in Pacific health-related issues. He is a firm believer of importance of Pacific values underpinning Pacific research. Ngā mihi. We also have tonight, or today rather, Charleen Silcock. She also is a regarded physiotherapist in Aotearoa and has affiliations to the Cook Islands, Scotland, Aotearoa, Tahiti and Niue. She feels strongly about the seminal role that her cultural identity plays in her practice. She has worked in the private sector and in the NHS service in the outpatients in the UK. She is currently the Associate Dean Pacific for the School of Physiotherapy, also at the University of Otago. She is dedicated to achieving better health outcomes for Pacifica. So both Charleen and Elijah are leaders for Pacific peoples in the physiotherapy space. Their experience is vast, and both starting life as a physiotherapist in the clinic through to working in academia and shaping physiotherapists in the making and providing the awareness and the growing the knowledge and skills to understand or to undergraduate students near the starting point of being registered as a physiotherapist. I'm incredibly honoured to be speaking with you both today. We're going to be exploring those key concepts of cultural safety, cultural competence and cultural responsiveness within physiotherapy practice, specifically for Pacific peoples. And we're going to be really emphasising the importance of the communities that we are serving, and they are diverse, especially within our Pacific peoples population here in Aotearoa. And we're going to be thinking of how that can be integrated into practice as physiotherapists. So nau mai hara mai ki kōrua. I'd like to welcome you both today, and would you both like to introduce yourselves?
Talofa, my name is Elijah. I think Maarama pretty much said all there is that needs to be said, so I'll pass it on.
Kia ora, Nisan Bolavanaka, whakalofalahi atu, marorele, talofa lava. Me taki Maarama for having us today. Excited to be here.
I'm going to get us started on that first question, and I'm going to start with you, Elijah. I'm going to pop you in that seat of saying, just thinking about What does cultural safety mean to you?
It's quite a different sort of space to be in when I am here now in academia compared to when I was practicing clinically. I think when I was practicing clinically, cultural safety at the time was this sort of emerging term, and so it was quite broad, seemed to cover sort of more around that cultural component. And at the time, it seemed to be what people were sort of more resonating with, that particular term. And for me, working clinically, it felt like a term where I had to critically reflect on myself, within the systems that I worked within, and also those power relationships that existed within healthcare at the time. And I was transitioning through different work spaces. I'd been working essentially in mostly persistent pain, and I was moving into working in primary care and working with different teams. And so it was about trying to reflect more on myself. And also with that reflection comes this concept of, sort of more thinking about what do my patients think? Because essentially, when I came through as an undergraduate, we didn't talk about this stuff. And so when you're practicing, I suppose for me personally, I felt as if I was doing these things. But it wasn't until I actually had the time to reflect, especially when there were difficult sort of situations with Pacific and non-Pacific patients, I sort of felt that I was lacking in a lot of areas. And so it did make me question whether or not I was providing that cultural safety for the individual. And so it's shifted slightly, where now I think more around cultural safety as being not so much about me per se, but more about what the individual themselves are feeling at that time. And so being now in a space where I have to teach this to students, it's very different compared to where it's a one-on-one situation with a patient, because now it's me versus 120 odd students, when I have to try and relay this information to them around cultural safety. And it's going to sound strange, but in some ways it almost feels as though that role has reversed, and so I can understand better now what that safety must feel like for that individual who's in that clinical space when they are on their own, because now I have to be that person in front of 120 others who are now sitting there thinking and obviously critiquing what I am doing as an educator, but also as just an individual. So I think there's been a shift with regards to the way that I've thought about this from my inception into the physio workforce, throughout my clinical practice and now through academia. This idea of cultural safety, I feel, is not something that is stagnant, but continuously changes. And the more that we research, the more that we do work with our communities, the more we sort of understand what that cultural safety looks like.
Malo.
Listening to Elijah, I think I agree there's been a shift both in our respective careers in terms of where we are with safety, but also a shift in how it's been taught or talking a lot about this as an undergraduate student. And I think once I graduated, I guess same. I thought maybe I'm doing this already. I think also for me, recently probably, now moving into it, because I've obviously worked in clinic, I've worked with teams, worked in various places, and now come back into academia doing some clinical work, but also some academic work. Cultural safety for me as a physiotherapist or a clinician has also changed. So I feel there's been spaces that I've been in the past that maybe I'm the only Pacific person in that space. So that, I guess, for me is one part of cultural safety for me and how I felt that personally, as well as trying to make the space whatever space I'm working in, whether that's clinical or academic, a safe place for both the people that are receiving the treatment that I might be giving, but also for the students that might be in the setting with me as well. So I guess I agree with Elijah in terms of it is changing, maybe through time, but also through different spaces and through different settings. Mm-hmm. I feel as I've grown and learned a little bit more about myself, a little bit more about where I'm from, who I'm from, and reflected on my journey. For instance, Elijah and I started working at university within about a year of each other, and I definitely think that, when you're in your space with more people like you, then that makes it a bit of a, that even adds to that safety, depending on kind of where you work.
If we're thinking of, within our specific people's communities, checking in, are you, because it's a terminology like what you're saying, Elijah, this cultural safety, what does it look like, or how has it looked like? You gave some examples. I want to tease down a little bit more into that. How do you ask, or how do you pick up that vibe or the feeling that you are providing that's culturally safe, that whoever you're seeing, the kiritaki patient or client, that you are delivering something that is safe for their culture?
I think practically what I feel like I do is it is on a feeling. I guess it's also being open and humble enough to be in a position where you are picking up or cueing into the person in front of you. We talk a lot to our students about reading the room. And that's not always an easy thing to do, but I think I feel it a lot more in my kopu than I know it in my head. So I think for me, I guess I kind of, you're picking up on sort of those non-verbal cues, you're picking up on the setting, but I think it's also about trying to slow down yourself and being confident enough to do that, to have, be able to feel that or be able to read the room a little bit.
I agree with Charleen. I don't think that there is necessarily a metric that we can use or anything that I've asked specifically from people that I've treated in the past about whether or not they felt safe. I think that for a lot of the situations that I've been in with people, it's come down to that feeling. And I think a lot of that stems, at least with specific people, and the way that we refer to ourselves as being relational. And so I think that relationality goes a long way. I didn't necessarily realize that that's what it was when I was working clinically, and I would see people and just be able to connect in some way. And I remember one particular incident. I had this tiny wee lady, and I came to get her from the waiting room, and she looked at me, and the first thing she said was, "I'm scared of you," and so her and I ended up being great together. She'd come back and only see me, but it was just from that particular way that she felt in the waiting room to it completely changing just from her and I having a korero. It just goes to show how important that connection actually is. And so I think that for a lot of the people that we see, there is an element of safety that is there because we can tell when they come back. I think for a lot of people that I've seen, lots of Pacific people, they cannot hide their emotions, on their face. So the smiles that they have when they come in and when they leave, that's enough for me. I think that's enough to tell me that I'm at least on the right track. Am I there yet? I can't tell. I can't tell if I've reached the epitome of what cultural safety is, and I don't think I ever will know whether I have. But do I feel like that person has had some semblance of safety within the session with me? Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's some things you all know that you can kind of feel when that doesn't feel right. I also feel like when I'm with someone, I try to feel like, how would I feel if this was my nana, or how would I feel if this was my my sibling or my my mum, and then I think that's how I gauge a little bit of how safe I am being, because as we know, in terms of Pacific, family is everything. So if I can feel like this is a safe place for my family, then that's how I kind of gauge how safe this could be for that person.
Kia ora. I'm listening to you both, and I'm really honing in on the similarities of it's whanaungatanga. It's that connection, and what does that mean if we're in the non Pacific peoples or non-Māori spaces? That means relationship building, but also it's giving trust. It's not that checklist that in some spaces we've got to have a checklist. Yes, I have asked them if they have any cultural needs. Tick. But really, is that cultural safety? Is that's transactional rather than relationship. I just want to say, Elijah, I can't see why that your little wee woman thought that you were scary. But I think how wonderful is that you made her feel really comfortable that she could say that. Working within our space is creating space to be who you are. Not being transactional. Sometimes we do have to be transactional, but giving that space and creating that, correct me if I'm wrong, please, the va of being able to have those conversations. Or so if we're looking at the second component of cultural competence, and again, it's specifically for our Pacific peoples, either receiving it or giving. So what does it look like what does that look like for our Pacific peoples?
I work in a space. One of my spaces is with students and in a clinical space, and I talk to our speak with our students rather about. It's not, because we are diverse peoples. It's not necessarily about knowing all the nuances about all the different cultures, because that's really hard. And I am Pacific, and I don't know all the nuances of being Pacific.
That's right.
So we speak a lot about, understanding Pacific values. I guess speaking, especially in terms of looking at this person that's in front of you, that they may be someone's grandmother, someone's mum, and looking around the Pacific values of, reciprocity, respect, love, collectiveness, and family. And so I guess that adds to some knowledge that we talk about having around working with our Pacific peoples. Yeah, and I guess trying to kind of understand the person that is coming in to see you, and maybe that understanding that they bring with them, who they're from and where they're from, and that might be different to where who you are and where you're from. We talk a lot about, I guess, understanding that everyone has a different worldview, and all those sorts of knowledge, which I think people can learn, and it's up to us to gain that knowledge in order to be able to work competently. But then again, knowing that there's only some way to working safely with our communities.
Kia ora. I'm going to add into this bit here about cultural safety. It does, like what you were talking about, Charleen, it really refers to the skill set of the physiotherapist, and it's as well as the behaviours of the physiotherapist, and making sure that you've got those knowledge and skills that you can apply. What are your thoughts on that one, Marsha?
They're definitely interwoven. They are interconnected. And when I think of cultural competency, I think of it being a place where we increase our knowledge base. It's about us upskilling in a way of understanding that there are diverse worldviews, and it means a few different things for me when I think of it in that sense. Because like you sort of questioned whether or not, if you have a good knowledge base, if you have the skill set, does that automatically make you safe? Not at all. And so there does have to be work. It doesn't necessarily mean that if we are competent by definition of, if that's what our definition is of cultural competency, as someone who has the appropriate knowledge, that doesn't translate directly into cultural safety for an individual or a participant. And I say that because, as Charleen mentioned, when we talk about Pacific peoples, we're talking about a very diverse group. And as she said, there are many nuances that separate us, but also many similarities between us. And so if we're thinking in that way, and if all we know is knowledge based off of that, then we are going to miss some nuances that are there for the individual. And so once again, it falls back to that relationality of it all. So we can definitely be competent, and we should be competent. I'm not saying that we just discard it because we're very safe in a clinical space. We definitely do need to go through and learn more about cultures, understand it, understand the value of culture, and obviously people's individual cultural values. Those are very important, and that's something that we stress to students to be more understanding of, to understand yourself first and foremost, understand who you are, where you come from, understand your biases, and then try and see how that differs from somebody else's. Being able to go through that process yourself, then it allows you to see somebody and to start to understand someone else. So I do think that with being competent, because obviously when I first went into practice, we didn't talk about this stuff, and it came in sort of later on to be culturally competent, and I questioned myself, am I that? I think so carry on with life, and then it wasn't until people started saying, well, I don't think that covers it all, and it definitely doesn't. And so that's where the sort of broader cultural safety that people started talking about, I started hearing it more often. And so I do think that there is more for us to do in that space and more for people to understand. But definitely just, for me, it's just as an example, I'm Samoan, but that doesn't mean that I know everything there is to know about, every Samoan individual that I've seen come through the door. And I've seen plenty of Samoans coming through. Some of them I get along with very well, and others it's not quite the same. There's still a level of respect there, and treatment still goes well, but it's not the same as it is with some other Samoan individuals. So we can see that there are differences between, intra and inter different cultures. So I think that's important to recognise as well, is that despite having this knowledge, it's about the application of it and understanding that there are going to be some slight differences. It's not all just superficial knowledge. I will just say this, I know I'm talking too much, but I remember that we used to sort of get taught, let's be more culturally competent within the workplace. And what it involved was just memorizing Pacific greetings. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I think that's a great thing. But I think that if that's the only thing you're doing, then we need to have a look and see what else could be done. Because at that superficial level, it's great to get people in the door, great to get people talking about it, but I don't think it's quite there, But I had a family member recently who had a stroke, and so I went up for support, and I was there through all of the rehab, acute right through, and they had a physio in the rehab component, and he was amazing. He was this young, Balangi physio, but it was his approach. He tried to learn things. He didn't just come through and say talofa and that was it. He'd learned to count in Samoan, he'd learned different words in Samoan and commands, and he'd try to, in every way that he interacted with my family member, he tried to think of what else could be done, how else to be involved in our conversations that we were having. And I sat there and thought to myself, that's a great approach. Like, I really like that, you know. And so I don't know if he just knew, because they knew that I was a lecturer, and so I don't know if that he was doing it just because of that, but I thought it was it was a really good example for me of how it can be done within the space.
I think that's the beauty of that, you know, learn exactly what you've said about learning the skills, having that knowledge, and then what are you going to do with it? Again, it's not a tick box. It used to be very tick box. And what does cultural competence mean? And I'm loving it that you said that, Elijah, that, you know, there's inter and intra-cultural differences, or especially ethnic differences that you were alluding to, because, you know, once upon a time, and I still believe that there are people that think this, is that all Pacific Islanders are the same. What I've seen in physiotherapists is that I've learnt this, I've gained some knowledge, and this is what you people need. You know, and that's still what we see. And I know what you need. I've read this book, and this is what you need to do. Thinking that they're behaving in a very culturally competent way. And then having that ability to be able to look at self. This is where I think is great with the recent review of the cultural safety and cultural competence standard, is being able to look at self in a different way. And it is quite kind of scary, because you're having to look at yourself and your behaviours that you're doing.
I think around what you're mentioning around the person or the clinician saying, I know what's right for you, I know what you need. I think over my practice, it's shifted quite a lot from that kind of space to being humble enough to sit back and say, actually, I know that what I do know is that the person in front of me is an expert on their own body, that they know what feels good, they know what feels right. And so I think if we are truly looking at journeying along with someone on their journey of recovery, or whether that be with long-term conditions or with an injury or whatnot, that we need to also be realistic and realize that actually we're not the holders of all knowledge, and what we think might be right for them might not be. And then once you can feel that way, then that's much more likely to be able to have the outcome of a partnership. And I think in my practice, it's very much of, you know, what can I bring to this, but what can you bring to this, and how can we work together, as opposed to saying, I know what's right and you need to do this. And that definitely has transformed a lot of how I've practiced. I've been humbled in many situations in terms of how I've gone about things, and maybe how I've gone about things in the past. And I think I reflect a lot on some of my practice previously where maybe I wasn't as safe, or I didn't maybe approach some of those situations that you've mentioned the right way or correctly, or gone in humbly, because I think in terms of Pacific, we are, when we go back to that relational space, and relationships matter, we also need the time to be able to do that. We need the time to be able to build those relationships, and we need to have the time to develop that trust, which is where that partnership and the session, or the partnership on that journey that you have with them, and the relationship you have with them, can be fostered. But I think if we go in with I know what was best for you, then we'll miss that opportunity. Or I've found that in the past.
We still see that type of behaviour now, and I say that because I have students who come and tell me about these experiences with their supervisors in certain spaces. And it's really difficult, because on one hand, we're trying to shift this narrative of we're the experts on absolutely everything. and we know what is right for you, so therefore you must do X, Y, and Z. Because that's what we've always been led to believe. That's what I was taught when I finished, physio, got my degree, and I thought I knew what was best for everybody coming through the door. And like Charleen, obviously I was humbled as well. I think that just because you're a Pacific person who's out practicing doesn't give you a free pass when you suddenly see a Pacific person coming through the door. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done there, and I have been humbled in those spaces. But I've used that as a learning for myself. That's a journey that we go on, and through that process of being humbled in that space, it allowed me to realize what's important as we go through. It's definitely what I found is that my interactions with people was definitely more a relationship than a dictatorship. But that took a while for me to understand what that was. And it's even harder sometimes when you're trying to translate that information to patients that come through. Lots of Pacific people that I've treated in the past just want to be told what to do. Mm. And when I was growing up, that was the same thing. We went to the doctor because they know what the answers are, and that's it. And so when you're growing up, obviously the age that I am now, that's the same belief that I have. And so that's led all the way through until we are at the stage where I am now, where I'm now teaching the exact opposite of these things to students coming through. And so we give this information to students and they go out, but then there's this tension between what we're teaching them here in school, this idea of everyone has their own unique worldview and try and understand individual, to being told by a supervisor that actually we know what's right and they don't, so you have to give them this. This is what their treatment needs to be based off of what I've seen. And so you try and, obviously navigate that tension, because you have to respect supervisors' opinions, because obviously they've been working for a long time and clinically it might be sound, but at the same time there is a lack of cultural competence and safety within that approach. And so we hear of these stories all the time. We continue to hear these stories. And a dangerous thing that I hear is that those same people will turn around and say how culturally safe they are, and talk about how culturally competent they are. And that's very hard to then sort of negate that and go against what they've said, because obviously they're the ones who are still seeing the students. So it's just, we still see it as that's really what I want to say, is that I thought that we're all on this journey together as physios in New Zealand. We all see this message, let's all get on board and go forward, but that's not the case at all. And I think it's harder for some people to change some of the ways that they've been brought up in.
We are an inquisitive and an intelligent bunch of people that are physiotherapists, and hopefully by people listening to this as well going, oh, what am I doing? And having that realization, is that me that is that roadblock? That am I the one that thinks I know it all? And no, this is the way that we should be providing physiotherapy. And I think that's truly, if we want to generalize of old practice, and I've worked with you, Charleen, in MSK space, and it was really, this is what you do, and this is what I'm seeing, this is what you need to do to improve, and that's it. No discussion, no chat in between people.
And I think we also work in a system, don't we, that doesn't enable some of those things. So if you're working in a clinic or you've only got half an hour, then those are the bare minimums that you need to be able to do. But I guess depending on the space that you're working on or working in, then if you even, I guess, privileging that time is really important, that time for relationship building. It's not just asking, what did you do today? But, I guess it's also allowing the time, because sometimes these relationships take a long time to build. Sometimes we can't just delve into asking the really personal questions, because the person that is in front of you has to feel comfortable enough to share some of those stories with you. I feel like I remember when I first graduated, it was, you could share a little bit, but not too much, because you don't want to share too much because that's not being professional. Whereas now, like even after the other day, I was asked, a student asked me, like, oh, I wanted to say something, this, and this, but I wasn't sure if that was the space. I was like, it was absolutely the space. Please feel free there, because that's how, you're finding those commonalities. You run around the same circles, or the same kind of people. And I definitely think that once I've been open to that in my practice, then it just becomes a little more natural and it feels more comfortable. And then it tends to start to feel more comfortable for all, rather than just getting to the hands-on or the doing, or the you need to do these exercises type thing.
I think you explained it really, really well, because when you're developing that relationship, it's not at the very beginning of the first session. It's constant. If we're thinking of clinical, and I'm sure this is like in many different spaces that us physiotherapists work in, it goes throughout all of the interaction the whole time. It's not, I'm going to stop here. It's that continual relationship building, which I think many people do.
I think of a story or an experience that I've had not that long ago, and I guess it's hard to put whether this is into competence, into safety or responsiveness, because I think it transcends all of them. Where we were seeing a person in a clinic situation, and at some point through the session, they spoke to us about how they felt uncomfortable, with a certain position that we were in the room, and the position that say one of the people in the room was standing or sitting in relation to the person that we were seeing in the clinic. And it kind of I reflected on that, and it wasn't, the reasons were being in terms of where they were from, that was the position that the other person was standing in was seen as rude or disrespectful, in terms of, I guess, the relation of the two of them. And so I guess it just it wasn't something that I'd thought about before, and honestly, because I hadn't had experience with that. But it definitely has, then I reflected on it, and how many other times in a medical situation might this have happened, where someone is standing at a position in the room that inadvertently makes the person that's sitting on the bed or lying on the bed uncomfortable, and how many times that would have happened in their life or in any other situation. And so I guess from there, that was something that I reflected on and has changed the way that I practice. So not just with a person from a particular place, but with anyone that I see, just, I guess, being really aware of my position in the room, whether that might be whether I'm standing, the person sitting, or whether I'm at the foot of the bed or next to the bed. Those are all the plinth, those sorts of things, just in terms of having a bit of an awareness that your position with the person, or the person that you're seeing, might make things a little bit uncomfortable. And I thanked the person afterwards, because I was like, without your saying so, we may never have known. And so I was really appreciative of that. And I think it's just those sorts of things, those little learnings that definitely humbled me in that moment. And we had students present, so it wasn't something that, and then I guess we had a conversation, a tāna or a tuatua after, about, how was that for you? So it's those we were really lucky, I think, to learn from the person that was happy to share that knowledge. I guess that can also speaks to being aware of the person that's in front of you might have roles and responsibilities with the community, roles and responsibilities in their family. I guess I can't speak to all Pacific, but maybe they have chiefly status or a title that they bring with themselves into that room. So you aren't not expected to necessarily know all of that. You might find that out, but I guess once you definitely know that, then there are, certain things that you could maybe do and reflect on your position in the room, say, that might make that feel a bit more comfortable for the person.
That comes with growth, to be honest. You know, the being inquisitive, the being comfortable enough to ask. I think for a long time we've always been led to believe that we can't do that we have to have the answers ourselves. And students sort of fall for that trap as well, where they have to know. I remember when I used to train new graduates coming through, and whenever they were seeing anybody, they would just freak out because they had to know exactly what was happening. They had to know every possible diagnosis, and they had to have a script. They had to have questions. They had to have answers of what to expect for everything. And sometimes the easiest thing to do is just to ask, but it's also not the easiest thing to do. You know, and so that's one of those things where it does take a lot of growth to recognize that actually I don't know all the answers, you know, and I had to learn that myself. You know, I consider myself a pretty smart guy, you know, and so I like to think when I go into a room I'm one of the smart ones in there. And it's not always nice to sort of realize that you don't know everything. You know? And so when I think it comes to like concepts like responsiveness, cultural responsiveness, that's the action we take. And sometimes that action is showing our inquisitive side, you know, being able to ask. I had an individual who I saw one time, and for him it was the environment. You know, what I got was a set of notes that said had a tendency to not engage with services, didn't really talk, didn't do really much at all, and so they sent him to me. And we were in my cubicle with the curtains closed, and I just said to him, because he just looked so uncomfortable, and I said to him, what would make you more comfortable? And he said, leaving the space. And so sometimes, without us realizing, it can be these environmental spaces that we're in as well. You know, these white walls, curtains, people right next door that can hear your entire story. You know, like these things are not easy for some people to disclose. And so for that person, we spent our sessions outside. You know, so the action was, in that situation, was to go out, was to get out of there. You know, take him where he felt comfortable. And it happened to be out walking amongst the trees. You know, so it's these types of things where we have to think just beyond what we can do within our clinical cubicle and think about what's going to be the best for the individual. And surprisingly, people tend to know what's best for them.
Aye.
You know, and I think we don't give them enough credit for that. So when we're talking about the interweaving of these concepts, you know, cultural competency, safety, and responsiveness, they do interweave, and that's something that you have to continuously check. The response that I have for somebody today may be different when they come in next time. So it's not going to be the same response. So we are constantly going through that component of competency where we're thinking about upskilling, having that understanding, having that knowledge, applying it, you know, making sure that that person is safe during our interaction, but also at the same time, with regards to our action, was it correct? So we have that reflective component as well. We go away, think about it, like Charleen said, talking to students, you know, going through that process. What else could I have done? What could have been better? And then add it again. You know, so it's this continuum of just going through. It's not, as I said, you reach the epitome, you've made it to the end and get your cultural certificate. You know, it's actually ongoing, and it's something that we need to be doing, whether we are in academia, whether we are in clinical practice. We're all physios, and we still need to be improving on ourselves.
This has been a Physiotherapy Board Te Poari Tiaki Tinana podcast. It was recorded on Tuesday the 26th of May 2026 and featured Board Professional Advisor Maarama Davis in conversation with Elijah Areli and Charleen Silcock from the School of Physiotherapy at the University of Otago. As always, if you want to share your thoughts about it with us, you can email us at physio@physioboard.org.nz. Kia ora.